Hi friends, I'm very happy to be here and share this idea with you that I think will be very useful to many of you. So let me start off by telling you a story. Here's the story. Once upon a time, there was this town or this people that was being threatened by a giant. This huge giant, this monster, was threatening to basically obliterate this town. And they sent to this town, sent their best soldiers and fighters and warriors to overcome this particular giant, and all of them were defeated. Apparently, this giant was very mighty, very strong, very capable in battle, and none of their soldiers and warriors were being successful. So a boy shows up and tells the authorities, listen, I can do this. I know what I'm doing. I can actually do this. I can take care of this. So nobody wanted to let this boy take care of it because, this is a job for the pros. Let the pros take care of it, After all, this boy was nothing more than a shepherd, and he basically didn't know what he was saying in the eyes of the authorities. Well, eventually, the boy is allowed to go face this giant, but not before the king calls him up and says, listen, what you're doing is very brave, we're very thankful, we really don't think you're going to succeed, but just in case, why don't you take my shield, why don't you take my sword, why don't you take my weapons, so that you can fight this giant off. And the boy gave this man, I think, the most important answer in the history of civilization, because it is the one answer that I think can change your life and my life every single day. The boy says, thank you, but no thank you. I'll bring my own tools. I'll bring my own weapons. I'll bring what I know how to use. Not your tools, but my tools. And you might be familiar with the story, of course. The boy prevailed upon this giant, and the rest is history. I think one of the most famous statues of all times was sculpted by Michelangelo, and it represents this boy, of course, as an adult. But here's the point of this story. The boy had an opportunity to take the best weapons from the king, but he chose instead to take that with which he was familiar. Now, I think the story of David and Goliath is one of the stories that has been most explained and used in metaphors and different. But the point that I want to emphasize here for you and I is that there's something about that boy, David, that is very authentic. The boy says, you know what, I got my own tools, I got my own way of doing this, and that's the way I'm going to take care of it. If I bring your tools, I'm not being authentic. And my question to you today is, how often in our lives are we actually bringing someone else's tools to fight off our own giants, our own opponents? We gotta be who we are, and that's called authenticity. So, the reason why this is so important is because we have to ask ourselves, what would have been the consequence to David if he had not been authentic? Had he taken weapons that he was not familiar with, what would have happened to him? Most likely, he would have been defeated in battle. Now, how many of us are not being authentic? How many of us are not being true to ourselves? Instead, we keep on taking cues from the environment. We do what we're told to do, we behave in the way that we're told to behave, we do what we must do, what we should do. In other words, we live a life that essentially isn't our own. It does not represent our highest truth, it does not represent our highest level of authenticity or sincerity, and essentially we end up living constantly feeling like we are cheating ourselves out of our own lives. So ask yourself this question. If this happens to anybody you know, ask yourself, what would be the consequence, the emotional consequence to that person? In other words, if a person indeed had been cheating on themselves, in other words, if a person had been living a life that isn't authentically their own, what would be the consequence? How would they feel? This is a question that in therapy we ask all the time. How would you feel if this happened? And most people who actually give that question, their attention, say, well, I would feel a tremendous sense of void, like something is missing. I would feel this constant longing because the moment that I'm living this life over here, which is not my life, I begin to miss that life over there, which is my life. So there's this continuous longing. There's a sense of void, something is missing. And eventually, the further we get away from ourselves, the more of a sensation of despair that takes over us. Despair. That despair can be translated into many common psychological terms today. But one of the consequences is that it begins to create, and I'm not speaking from a psychological point of view or from a medical point of view, I'm not talking from that perspective, I'm speaking from a metaphysical point of view. You see, the distance between the life I'm living and the life I meant to live or the life I chose to live, that distance creates this emptiness, this void, which creates the longing I'm talking about, but eventually a sense of panic. It's like, I'm missing the boat. The boat's leaving, this ship is sailing without me. And it creates that sense of panic. How many of you have had that sensation? The ship is sailing without me. Oh my gosh, run! You see, that sense of panic. So have you ever heard of people who feel the sensation of panic? You know, we don't diagnose anybody here, we don't treat mental illness, we don't do any of that, but have you ever heard of people telling you that? I feel the sensation of panic periodically. And then once a person begins to experience that, which is nothing more than a consequence of a prolonged way of living away from themselves, once that begins to happen, the typical thing or the common thing, I'm not saying it happens to everybody, but the common thing, at least what we see here at the office, the common thing is for the person to self-medicate. In our culture, we use one particular chemical, one particular drug, which is a universal drug. It's legal, you can buy it anywhere, and it's the universal relaxant. It's ethanol, and it comes in many, many forms. It comes in the form of wine, beer, whiskey. It comes in many forms. All that is, you know, the different amounts of flavoring and different things that are added to the drug, which is ethanol or alcohol. And people say, well, let me have a drink to relax. And the question is, if we need to relax, it means that we're tense. What is that tension all about? Why are you so tense? In other words, if we're constantly needing a drink, it means that we're constantly tense. The question is, why so tense? Now, picture this. The ship sailing. I'm missing out on my own life. Would you be relaxed at the moment, or would you be tense, ready to run? This is the point I'm making. So the things begin to compound because the extensive use of ethanol begins to bring its own consequences to the person's life. It brings up its own problems, and things begin to get worse and worse and worse. It's like a snowball effect. So by the time a person comes in here and says, well, something is not right, usually a number of things are not right, and we have to kind of work backwards to put things back in order. But it all started with one idea. We were not bringing the totality of who we are to our own lives. We were living someone else's lives. We adopted someone else's identity. We adopted a different way of living that isn't our own. We brought someone else's tools to the battle. So you might be asking yourself, all right, I got this. I'm familiar with some words such as anxiety, panic attacks. You know, I've seen these types of things. I've read about them on the internet. The question is, how do you deal with it? Well, the only way I know to deal with it, and you know, we've been doing this for many, many, many years, is we help people get in touch with their true selves. And you'd be amazed how all of that stuff disappears, melts away, when we simply begin to be authentically our true selves. So before we can really get into this, we have to have an understanding of what we mean by your true self. Because if you go out in the street and you stop 100 people at random and you ask them all, are you living a life that represents your true self? Are you being authentic? I'll guarantee you that at least initially, all 100 of them will tell you, of course, I'm authentic, I'm true, this is me. But if we begin to talk here at the office the way that we do here, a little bit deeper, I think 99 of them will tell you, nah, that's the life I'm living is not quite my life. So as we go deeper into this conversation, we all have this awareness that we're not quite there yet. In other words, we are all way more than what's manifesting here on this earth. In other words, the life that we're living is a mere shadow of the life that we're meant to live, all of us. No matter who you are, what you're doing, we're only living a small, meager portion of our capacity as a human being. And it is precisely that. It is precisely the fact that we're not living our full lives with our full capacity that generates the sense of void, which then eventually generates the panic and so forth, and eventually we begin to self-medicate and all of that. It's a snowball effect, like I said earlier. So if any of this makes any sense to you, let me know. Give me a call, send me an email, let's set up a time to talk. We like to do this on the phone first. We engage in a dialogue, because if we're going to work together, two things are really important. Number one, we have to make sure that what I have to offer is what you need to receive. We have to have a good match there. And we can determine that by talking on the phone. We have to determine what your goals are, what your situation is, what you've done to try to solve your problem. You know, we have to get to know each other a little bit. And you have to ask me questions as well. We have to have a dialogue and discover mutually if we're a good fit. I only work with people with whom we're a good fit. It has to be a good fit. Otherwise, we're kind of spinning our wheels, right? We're wasting your time and essentially we're not getting anywhere. But once we determine that we're a good fit, we also have to determine where to start working, because we offer many levels of service. We offer free content such as this video. We offer video courses. We offer interactive sessions, group sessions, classes. I mean, a whole bunch of different things, including premium coaching and at a very high level of service. So, you know, not every service is right for every person, not just because of cost, not just because it has nothing to do with cost. It has to do with, you know, that which one can digest at that moment in their lives. In other words, we have to match the right service to the right person. So we determine both of these things. In other words, we determine if you and I are a match to work together, and we determine at what level you and I are going to interact, and we do this over the telephone, and then we can go to work. If those two, you know, once those two things are cleared, we can go to work, and your life will change. Now, what's very common is that a person begins to interact at one level, and as they feel that they're moving along, sometimes we begin to do different kinds of things. But the important thing is that if you and I are not a match and you want to give me a call and have that conversation anyway, I'll help you to the best of my ability to find a venue that is right for you. Because even if I'm not the right match for you, it still doesn't matter. You deserve your own life back. So don't give up. Don't give up. If you don't like what I have to say, whatever, if you want my help finding the right avenue for you, still, that's a valid conversation, and I'll be more than happy to help you do it. We've been doing this for 21 years, and when I speak to somebody on the phone and we're not quite a match, I tell them, look, I suggest this or this or this alternative for you. It might be a better match for you. And people often thank me, but I'm happy to do it for one very simple reason. You know, my students ask me, what's your secret, they tell me. And I don't really have a secret. I just treat you the way that I would like for you to treat me if I were calling you. In other words, that's all that I know how to do. You know, so I would like to have somebody that would answer the phone and have a talk with me, get to know me, and sincerely attempt to find the best venue for me. And that's what I'm willing to do for you. So, you know, if this makes any sense to you, then perhaps by email we can set up a time to talk on the phone, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much, and blessings.